in the business world. Emotional vulnerability, an aspect of the anima, is a definite sign of weakness in this context, as women who have moved into the corporate world are quickly discovering. Signs of strong emotion, particularly crying on the job, are regarded as indicators of low credibility in the workplace. Furthermore, men can speak of their sexual prowess and even overtly and covertly encourage each other to do so, but they cannot speak about impotence. The anima may make one soft. One male patient of mine struggled for several sessions about whether to bring up the issue of his sexual impotence. When he finally did, I asked him why it was so difficult for him to talk about. He eventually decided that it was because he was afraid that I would think him unmanly. Yet another male patient, a successful business executive who had been injured in an automobile accident, hid the extent of his physical pain and the limitations from his superior at work because he was afraid of losing credibility and status within his corporation. He was afraid of being seen as less than man enough to do the job. There are many other examples of socially conditioned attitudes that burden men and become part of the general male shadow problem. Emotional vulnerability, signs of physical limitation, and sexual impotence are only a few of the weaknesses that men hide because of shame, humiliation, and a fear of being perceived as inferior. The son as carrier of the father's shadow. A man's shadow can sometimes incorporate problems that come from his father's unresolved issues. These issues may, in fact, go back several generations. In such cases, we may say that the personality of the son is contaminated by the shadow of the father. For example, in my practice, a boy with a particularly difficult shadow problem is evaluated in the context of his father's personality, which includes his attitudes toward masculinity, as well as his boy's intellectual abilities, emotional makeup, and life experiences. When a father does not own his own inadequacies and vulnerabilities consciously, these problems are often passed on to his son. The son may sometimes unconsciously live out his father's shadow, with the result that the father not only experiences some relief at seeing these qualities outside of himself, but he will also be critical of the son for not measuring up to the way the father wants him to be. This, of course, places the boy in the untenable position of having to carry the shadow and anima qualities of his father, while at the same time being criticized and rejected for it. He is faced with the alternative of either rejecting himself or rebelling against his father. In both cases, he loses. The son is often brought for therapy when he is carrying the father's shadow. But if the father can be treated instead of the son's problem seems to clear up. Or if the son is treated without the father and improves, then the father's problem becomes apparent. The ideal is to treat them both, but unfortunately, this is not always possible. The mother obviously can contribute to the son's difficulties by unconsciously communicating her own shadow problems to the child. When a boy attempts to emotionally remove himself from the dominant influence of his mother, his father becomes more important in the formation of his sense of masculine identity. The sociopath archetype of the unrelated. The most devastating manifestation of a complete dissociation from the anima is when a man develops a sociopathic personality. This person has few friends and is very often in trouble with authorities and the law. We're not talking psychopaths, we're talking sociopaths. His most salient characteristic is a lack of capacity for love, accompanied by an equal inability to experience guilt or conscience. It is as if the most basic attributes of love and empathy are simply empty spaces in his personality. This defect occurs in men more than 3 times as often as it does in women, and it is even more frequent in men whose fathers are also sociopathic. As far as we know, sociopathic personalities are formed very early in life. By late adolescence, the antisocial pattern of behavior has become well established, characterized by often frighteningly criminal and exploitative behavior and shallowness in all relationships. Its tragedy is compounded by the fact that it is also more prevalent amongst the poor. The sociopathic personality amounts to an archetypal constellation of male negativity and is hence a ready carrier of the masculine shadow in our society, particularly when it occurs in a political, social, or religious leader. Conscienceless mass murderers like Charles Manson, Richard Speck, and Ted Bundy are among its more sensationalized representatives. But sociopaths can also be found among respected businessmen, politicians, and other professionals, as many are capable of charming their victims whilst they extort, exploit, deceive, and humiliate them, different to the psychopath who could be someone, say, like a surgeon. Different abilities to separate and be quite unsympathetic and objective about what they're doing. Yeah, a surgeon needs that. They need to, Anywho, that's why often they are psychopathic. Sorry, on with the book. Here, perhaps more than in any other personality disorder, we find the defect of relating to others as objects. Their love is not perverted as it seems to be, it is simply absent. It is perhaps the antithesis of love. As Erich Fromm states, the opposite of love is not hate but indifference. The sociopath's lack of love for others is not offset by a love of self, as the typically self-defeating nature of his life so frequently attests. His entire life seems to be a continual, loveless act, which in one way or another culminates in self-destruction. Among personality disorders, sociopathy is still an enigma. We do not fully understand its cause. It remains one of the few disorders for which so far there is absolutely no cure, in spite of the fact that it is the most studied and researched of all personality problems. Perhaps one reason for this is the fact that sociopathic personalities find no need to be treated because they feel there is nothing wrong with them. The sociopathic person poses a dramatic challenge. Because if love, as Fromm pointed out, consists of care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge for the other, then how are we as individuals and as a society to regard the sociopath? Perhaps this dilemma is the existential test of the Christian dictum. As you do unto the least of my brethren, so you do unto me. Integrating the shadow. For Jung, the acknowledgement of the shadow is an essential step in the individuation process. It is a means of reaching into deeper and often less accessible levels of the psyche, where the anima as mediator of the creative unconscious can be met. Jung states, the shadow, although by definition a negative figure, sometimes has certain clearly discernible traits and associations which point to quite a different background. It is as though he were hiding meaningful contents under an unprepossessing exterior. Experience confirms this, and what is more important, the things that are hidden usually consist of increasingly numinous figures. The one standing closest behind the shadow is the anima, who is endowed with considerable powers of fascination and possession. In the case of the individual, the problem constellated by the shadow is related on the plane of the anima, that is, through the relatedness. The integration of the shadow, then, is a constructive and expansive endeavor which eventually allows a man to develop increased degrees of personal emotional freedom, self-acceptance, and a greater degree of autonomy in his beliefs, feelings, and attitudes than he previously possessed. Accepting one's own dark side also culminates in a greater respect for others and a more empathetic understanding of others' shortcomings and struggles. One of the greatest benefits is uncovering the shadow. One of the greatest benefits in uncovering the shadow is that the general quality of human relationship is improved because we take a deeper responsibility for ourselves, thereby projecting less of our unintegrated selves onto others. This process moves us forward toward relatedness to our fellow human beings. In short, this process has the effect of increasing our capacity to love. And it is to men's sense of love that we now turn. And that would be chapter 7 that I might read later. Whoops. See you later.